The United Kingdom is a place with an interesting but sometimes strange and dark past. For at least hundreds of years royalty and the hierarchy have indulged in murder, cannibalism, torture, extreme cruelty and the occult. From Queen Elizabeth I to Queen Victoria, the British monarchy have always had a fascination with the occult and occultists. Dr. Richard Sugg at Durham University explains, "The human body has been widely used as a therapeutic agent, with the most popular treatments involving flesh, bone, or blood. Cannibalism was found not only in the New World, as often believed, but also in Europe. One thing we are rarely taught at school yet is evidenced in literary and historic texts of the time is this: James I refused corpse medicine, Charles II made his own corpse medicine. Along with Charles II, eminent users or prescribers included Francis I, Elizabeth I's surgeon, John Bannister, Elizabeth Grey, Countess of Kent, Robert Boyle, Thomas Willis, William III, and Queen Mary. It survived well into the 18th century, and amongst the poor it lingered stubbornly on into the time of Queen Victoria. Quite apart from the question of cannibalism, the sourcing of body parts now looks highly unethical to us. In the heyday of medicinal cannibalism, bodies or bones were routinely taken from Egyptian tombs and European graveyards. Not only that, but some way into the 18th century one of the biggest imports from Ireland into Britain was human skulls. Whether or not all this was worse than the modern black market in human organs is difficult to say. A painting of Charles I's execution in 1649 shows people surging forward to mop up the former king's blood. It was thought to have healing properties. Dr. Richard Sugg continues, in continental Europe, where the axe fell routinely on the necks of criminals, blood was the medicine of choice for many epileptics. In Denmark, the young Hans Christian Andersen saw parents getting their sick child to drink blood at the scaffold. So popular was this treatment that hangmen routinely had their assistants catch the blood in cups as it spurted from the necks of dying felons. Occasionally a patient might shortcut this system. At one early 16th century execution in Germany, a vagrant grabbed the beheaded body before it had fallen, and drank the blood from him. The last recorded instance of this practice in Germany fell in 1865. Do not fall into the trap of following their customs and worshipping their gods. Do not inquire about their gods, saying, "How do these nations worship their gods? I want to follow their example." You must not worship the Lord your God the way the other nations worship their gods, for they perform for their gods every detestable act that the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters as sacrifices to their gods. So be careful to obey all the commands I give you. You must not add anything to them or subtract anything from them. Deuteronomy chapter 12 verse 30. Britain's mythology talks of strange pagan-like gods, giants, spirits, magic, wizards, witches and witchcraft. Ancient monuments such as Stonehenge is all that is left from a forgotten history. Very little is known about life in ancient Britain before the arrival of the Romans. Lee and Barry of BritishHeritage.com explains. There are hundreds of myths, theories, and legends about Stonehenge. Various people have attributed the building of this great megalith to the Danes, Romans, Saxons, Greeks, Atlanteans, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Celts, King Aurelius Ambrosius, Merlin, the Druids, and even aliens. Researchers have proven this age-old theory linking Stonehenge's construction to the Druids or anybody else impossible to prove. Through modern radiocarbon dating techniques, scientists have discovered that its builders completed Stonehenge over 1,000 years before the Celts are thought to have inhabited this region, eliminating Druids from the possibilities. Druids are believed worshipped in marshes and forests, but it has been verified that they did use Stonehenge occasionally as a temple of worship and sacrifice when they moved into the region. Modern Druids still congregate at Stonehenge on the midsummer solstice, clad in white robes and hoods. The Romans equated British gods with their own pagan gods. Druidic law forbade its followers to write down any of the religious teachings, a rule that has prevented modern British people from having first-hand knowledge of their religion. Caesar wrote, "The whole nation of the Gauls is greatly devoted to ritual observances, and for that reason those who are smitten with the more grievous maladies and who are engaged in the peril of battle either sacrifice human victims or vow to do so, employing the Druids as ministers for such sacrifice. They believe in effect, that, unless a man's life be paid, the majesty of the immortal gods may not be appeased." Most believe these accounts were, no doubt, colored by the Romans' personal biases and an agenda. Caesar, in particular, was trying to garner support for his campaign from his audience at home, a task made easier by painting a barbaric picture of the Druids. Barbaric, to a Roman audience who flocked to see equally gruesome deaths at the hands of the gladiators. Nevertheless, both Roman and Greek historians did record the Druids' highly organized legal and educational systems and seemed to revere their mathematical and scientific knowledge. Both sources considered the Druids to be noble savages, a highly learned but religiously primitive people who worshipped a pantheon of gods. Emperor Claudius declared Druidic practices illegal in 54 AD. The Druids' future in Roman Britain became increasingly uncertain. In 61 AD, the Romans planned a massacre of the defiant Druids at Anglesey, the center of their culture, and their last stronghold in consolidated Britain. As the Roman soldiers waited for the tide to recede so they could cross the Mina Strait that separates Anglesey from the mainland, the Druids held their position by lining up along the opposite shore and, as Tacitus reports in his Annals, raising their hands to heaven and screaming dreadful curses. But curses were not enough. The Roman soldiers crossed the strait and conquered the island, destroying both the Druids and the sacred groves of their religion. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the people of Israel these instructions, which apply both to native Israelites and to the foreigners living in Israel. If any of them offer their children as a sacrifice to Molech, they must be put to death. The people of the community must stone them to death." Leviticus chapter 20 verse 1. This seemed to signal the end of Druidism in Britain, though it is thought to have survived in some parts of Ireland. In the early 18th century, interest in Druidism underwent a revival, primarily as a result of the less than noble efforts of one man, Edward Williams, or Iolo Morganwg as he was known, who claimed to have discovered an ancient Welsh book of Druidic knowledge. This book, called the Bardas, was later revealed to be a forgery. Morganwg made up most of what was contained within, including the ceremony of the Assembly of Bards on the Isle of Britain. Morganwg held the first Gorset ceremony in 1792 on London's Primrose Hill. The ancient order of Druids is the senior Druidic order in the world, and the oldest in continuous existence. It has been revived in London, England, in 1781. It is represented in England, Wales, Scotland, and the Commonwealth of Nations. Notable members include Brother Jack the Ripper, suspect Lord Randolph Churchill, Lord George Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, Sir Winston Churchill, Lord George Godolphin Osborne, the 10th Duke of Leeds and Lord George Spencer Churchill, the 8th Duke of Marlborough. Did the Romans really end Druid practices? Or did they simply force these practices to go underground? Were these ancient rituals continued in secret for hundreds of years? Have they survived? Was Druidism and their rituals actually satanic? The Romans' religion of choice, Catholicity, also has pagan connections and continued, preserved, and shared many pagan and satanic holidays, rituals and celebrations. The ancient order of Druids is ruled by the Imperial Grand Lodge and the Grand Lodge of England. The Freemasons are regularly connected to modern-day Satanism, with many of their members being Satanists. Members like Jimmy Savile, Edward Heath, Cyril Smith, who was close friends with an exposed Satanist called Michael Horgan. Victim Michael Roberts explains how Michael Horgan, who has also used the name Sean O'Donnell, became known as the High Priest of Satan, organized a series of satanic-themed orgies. In one of them he raped little Michael and an even younger female child before watching on as others did the same. He organized outdoor parties for these activities on Saddleworth Moor, where child killers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley had buried their victims. Youngsters from 2 to 13 were drugged, tortured, and sexually abused during the satanic ceremonies. Horgan was also pals with Raymond Hewlett, the child rapist questioned in relation to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Michael added, "Michael Horgan used to take me out to visit people regularly. It didn't seem that far away. It didn't take us long to get there. We went there in a taxi. Just me and Michael Horgan. I can't remember where it was, just that it was a long row of houses and that it wasn't far from where we lived in Rochdale." Rochdale would also end up being center of another satanic panic in May 1990. When a boy from what the social services would call family number 1 claims his house is haunted. The boy claimed that there is a ghost in the attic that takes his dad to parties. Social services claim this boy was acting weird at school, hiding in tiny closets. The boy talked about being put in a cage and claimed that adults would laugh at him and touch him through the bars of the cage in what he claimed was a game called Tig. This case would end up being gagged by a court order and all people involved were later declared innocent, but social workers at the time claimed that they believed through interviews with the 4 children of family number 1 that 5 other families could potentially be involved in satanic abuse. The social workers claim that the children told them stories of human and animal sacrifice. They also claim to have witnessed the murder of babies and even been forced to kill babies themselves. In a 1990s documentary called Death of a Childhood, family number 1 are interviewed. The documentary hide their faces, but family number deny all allegations of Satanism and abuse. Like many other cases of satanic abuse, the Rochdale case fell apart and hysterical social workers were blamed, and like other cases the interviewing techniques were questioned. The defense claimed that the social workers' questions were leading. On Death of a Childhood, one social worker voiced by an actress claimed there were 50 interviews conducted. She said it would have been impossible to conduct 50 interviews without asking any leading questions. She also explains claims that one of the social workers read an article about satanic abuse, but other than that none of the social workers had knowledge of satanic abuse. The social worker claims that none of the social workers were ready or expected to be treated with such contempt by the court. The first question they asked one of the social workers in court was, "How have you managed to get to the age of 30 without having kids?" The social worker claims that the boy described some horrible things that had happened to him. This led one of the social worker to say that must have been really horrible. She claimed the court then spent an hour criticizing the social workers for leading questions, and even accused the social workers of implanting the idea that what was happening to him was horrible in his head. Due to the confusion of cases like Nottingham, Rochdale, Cleveland and other well-known cases. Many people began to believe the Satanic Panic was based on hysterical social workers pressuring children to tell obscene stories. Most began to doubt many of the cases. Some people have even tried to deny the very existence of satanic ritual abuse. On the 3rd of June 1994, The Independent reported, "Satanic abuse dismissed as myth by government inquiry. Report blames evangelical Christians and specialists for the scare which led to investigations." Rosie Waterhouse reports satanic abuse is a myth. A government-backed inquiry has concluded. No evidence was found to substantiate any of the 84 cases in which it was alleged that children were sexually abused in bizarre black magic rites. The findings, exclusively revealed by The Independent on Sunday in April, were published yesterday after a 3-year inquiry conducted by Jean Lafontaine, Emeritus Professor of Social Anthropology at the London School of Economics. The report blames evangelical Christians and self-proclaimed specialists for the scare which led to police investigations across Britain from 1988 to 1991. The conclusions will strengthen claims for compensation by families whose children were taken into care after false accusations of child sex abuse in satanic ceremonies. Solicitors acting for 3 families from Rochdale have issued writs alleging negligence and breach of statutory duty by Rochdale's Social Services Department. Their 19 children were seized in 1990 by police and social workers, who believed they were victims of satanic abuse. A similar scare on the island of South Ronaldsay in 1991 prompted the Department of Health to commission an inquiry to investigate all such allegations. Neil Kinsella, the Rochdale family's solicitor, said, "The families were victims of what appeared to be a macabre race by social workers to be the first to discover rings of satanic child abusers. As a result of the false allegations, the parents and children were subjected to appalling emotional and psychological trauma." Virginia Bottomley, Secretary of State for Health, urged child care professionals to read and learn lessons from the report which, she said, exposed the myth of satanic abuse. David Blunkett, Labour's health spokesman, said, "It is crucial we do not lose sight of the fact that many of the children involved had been sexually abused. Children must be protected from all sexual abuse. The fact that ritual abuse was ruled out here must not undermine that imperative." Providing the first official definition of satanic abuse, the report said, "Rites that allegedly include the torture and sexual abuse of children and adults, forced abortion, human sacrifice, cannibalism, and bestiality may be labeled satanic or Satanist. Their defining characteristic is that the sexual and physical abuse of children is part of rites directed to a magical or religious objective. There is no evidence that these have taken place in any of the 84 cases studied." The report said there were 3 substantiated cases of ritual, not satanic abuse. It explained, these were cases in which self-proclaimed mystical magical powers were used to entrap children and impress them, and also adults, with the reason for the sexual abuse, keeping them compliant. In these cases, The ritual was secondary to the sexual abuse, which clearly formed the primary objective to the perpetrators. The rituals performed in these cases did not resemble the extreme allegations such as drinking blood, child sacrifice and cannibalism, which featured in the other 81 cases. The report said there was evidence the number of satanic abuse allegations involving children had fallen since 1991, but more adults were now claiming they had been ritually abused as children. Interview techniques used by social workers and the inaccurate transcribing or summarizing of interviews were criticized. The interviews with children were frequently poorly conducted. Too frequent interviewing, leading questions, contamination, pressure, and inducements to agree to suggestions may have resulted from the anxiety of the interviewers to find out what happened. Trying to explain why social workers and others believed the children were victims of satanic abuse, the report concluded. A belief in evil cults is convincing because it draws on powerful cultural axioms. People are reluctant to accept that parents, even those classed as social failures, will harm their own children, and even invite others to do so, but involvement with the devil explains it. The notion that unknown powerful leaders control the cult revives an old myth of dangerous strangers. Demonizing the marginal poor and linking them to unknown Satanists turns intractable cases of abuse into manifestations of evil. However, a Labour MP, Lynn Golding, Vice Chairwoman of the Parliamentary Children's Group, called for another investigation involving psychiatrists and therapists who say they have dealt with satanic abuse. Mrs. Golding, MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme, said, "Just because one person found no evidence, that doesn't mean satanic abuse does not exist." Satanic ritual abuse does exist in modern-day Britain, and there is plenty of proof of it. A victim of Jimmy Savile's satanic abuse told of her sheer terror as she was tied to an altar and raped by the depraved star during a black mass. The girl, who the Express called Paula Bennett to protect her true identity, was just 13 at the time of the sickening attack in 1975. Now aged 50, Paula still suffers horrific flashbacks and cannot sleep properly. Recalling her torment, Paula described how Savile was sitting on a throne wearing a mask and robes, clutching a trademark cigar. Speaking at an address in North London, Paula said, "I was brought into a dark cellar and made to stand in front of 3 men in a circle, with the man in the middle sitting on a throne-like chair in a bright gown with a cigar in his mouth. A man stood on either side in blue cloaks and masks. Jimmy Savile beat and raped a 12-year-old girl during a secret satanic ritual in a hospital. The perverted star wore a hooded robe and mask as he abused the terrified victim in a candle-lit basement. He also chanted "Hail Satan" in Latin as other pedophile devil worshippers joined in and assaulted the girl at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire. The attack, which happened in 1975, shines a sinister new light on the former DJ's 54-year reign of terror. Seville, who died aged 84 in October 2011, is now Britain's worst sex offender after police revealed he preyed on at least 450 victims aged 8 to 47. The girl kept her torment hidden for nearly 20 years before finally opening up to therapist Valerie Sinizan. Dr. Sinizan told the Sunday Express she first spoke to the victim in 1992. She had been a patient at Stoke Mandeville in 1975 when Seville was a regular visitor. She recalled being led into a room that was filled with candles on the lowest level of the hospital, somewhere that was not regularly used by staff. Several adults were there, including Jimmy Seville who, like the others, was wearing a robe and a mask. She recognized him because of his distinctive voice and the fact that his blonde hair was protruding from the side of the mask. He was not the leader, but he was seen as important because of his fame. She was molested, raped and beaten and heard words that sounded like Ave Satanas, a Latinized version of Hail Satan, being chanted. There was no mention of any other child being there, and she cannot remember how long the attack lasted, but she was left extremely frightened and shaken. Seville was a volunteer porter and fundraiser at the hospital between 1965 and 1988 and had his own quarters there. 5 years after the hospital attack, he abused a second victim during another Black Mass ceremony held at a house in a wealthy London street. The woman was 21 at the time and was made to attend an orgy, which later took on a darker twist. Dr. Sinizan, director of the Clinic for Dissociative Studies in London, said, "A second victim approached me in 1993. She said she had been lent out as a supposedly consenting prostituted woman at a party in a London house in 1980. The first part of the evening started off with an orgy, but halfway through some of the participants left. Along with other young women, the victim was shepherded to wait in another room before being brought back to find Seville in a Master of Ceremonies kind of role with a group wearing robes and masks. She too heard Latin chanting and instantly recognized Satanist regalia. Although the girl was a young adult, who was above the age of consent, she had suffered a history of sexual abuse and was extremely vulnerable." Both victims contacted Dr. Sinizan, who is president of the Institute of Psychotherapy and Disability. While she was involved in a Department of Health-funded study into sexual abuse committed during rituals and religious ceremonies. She said, "Both these witnesses did speak to police at the time but were vulnerable witnesses, and on encountering any surprise or shock did not dare to give all the details. The police took no action." Dr. Sinizan added, Seville was still a huge celebrity in the early 90s, let's not forget, and there was never any action taken against him or any of the others involved. Neither girl knew one another, they lived in different parts of the country and contacted me a year apart, yet their experiences are very similar. Whether Seville was a practicing Satanist or merely enjoyed dressing up to scare his victims even more will perhaps never be known, but he left those two girls mentally scarred. Dr. Sinizan has passed details of the abuse to officers from the Seville inquiry, Operation U-Tree. A joint report published by the Metropolitan Police and the NSPCC uncovered at least 30 claims of abuse at Stoke Mandeville. The hospital said it was unable to discuss individual cases while its own speaking out investigation was ongoing. Anne Eaton, chief executive of Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust, said, "As the investigation's name suggests, it is very keen to hear from anybody with any knowledge that they feel could help its work or anybody that needs support because of Jimmy Seville's alleged behavior." On November 9, 1982, Malcolm and Susan Smith and Albert and Carol Hickman were convicted in Telford, Shropshire for a series of sexual and physical assaults against children during the course of Satanic rituals. Malcolm Smith carved an inverted cross on one child's abdomen and branded her genitals with a red-hot altar knife. UK database adds. A couple who used black magic to abuse an 11-year-old girl have been found guilty of historical sex offences. Albert Hickman, 65, was convicted of raping the girl between 1972 and 1975 at his home in St. Athan, Vale of Glamorgan. Carolee Hickman, 64, was found guilty at Cardiff Crown Court of indecent assault and aiding and abetting rape. The court heard she held the girl down by the arms during the rape. She also threatened to harm her mother by using her powers as a witch. The husband and wife were found guilty by a majority verdict after the jury had deliberated for 5 hours. The victim, now aged in her 50s, said she went to the home while she and friends were truant from school and was plied with cigarettes and alcohol. The court was told the couple talked with the girl about black magic and gave her tarot card readings. The girl was made to have sex with Albert Hickman so she could be part of the couple's magic circle, the jury heard. The witness said, "Carolee said she was a witch and would come and get me and would make my mother ill. She even said she could kill my mother if she wanted to. She had a knife with a jeweled handle kept in a wooden box with carvings on the top. She cut my hand and sucked the blood out of it." The Hickmans were jailed in 1982 for similar child sex offenses, the court was told. The girl blocked it out for 40 years until it came back during counseling in 2011. The victim, now 53, and cannot be named for legal reasons, told the trial last month that Hickman would make threats to kill her mother using black magic. The court heard that Hickman now sucked her young victim's blood after cutting her thumb with a special bejeweled knife. After the schoolgirl was held down by his wife, former RAF worker Albert Hickman, raped her. Both have already been jailed for a string of child sex assaults in which black magic rituals played a part, Cardiff Crown Court heard. Hickman was jailed for 10 years, reduced to 8 on appeal, at Northampton Crown Court in 1982, after admitting 5 child sex abuse charges. His wife was jailed for 5 years for a series of 5 similar charges, including aiding and abetting him. Both claim they have no memory of the schoolgirl, now a married mother, in the present case. But the jury has heard how her childhood best friend was banned from setting foot inside the couple's home by her parents. The girl's mother recounted how her husband, who also worked for the RAF, called in military investigators because of his concerns. Her daughter had started talking about Satan and bought a novel by popular author Dennis Wheatley, who wrote about the occult. I told her that no way should she be reading Dennis Wheatley. It was not the sort of thing that she should read at her age. I told my husband all about it because I was getting very concerned and he was really upset about it all. He said that he was going to see the RAF family welfare officer, and he did. Shortly afterwards, Mr. and Mrs. Hickman left the area. The jury also heard that when the couple's present home in Shrewsbury was raided in June 2012, it was filled with books on the occult. Detective Constable Joanne Lewis, who headed the investigation, said, "They were on bookshelves, all around the floor, on surfaces, everywhere really." The current alleged victim claims repressed of abuse resurfaced during bereavement counseling after the death of a son. Leviticus chapter 20 verse 3. I myself will turn against them and cut them off from the community, because they have defiled my sanctuary and brought shame on my holy name by offering their children to Molech. And if the people of the community ignore those who offer their children to Molech and refuse to execute them, I myself will turn against them and their families and will cut them off from the community. This will happen to all who commit spiritual prostitution by worshipping Molech. I will also turn against those who commit spiritual prostitution by putting their trust in mediums or in those who consult the spirits of the dead. I will cut them off from the community. On the 10th of March 2011, the Daily Mail reported, the leader of a satanic sex cult is facing a lengthy jail sentence after being found guilty of multiple counts of rape and child abuse. Colin Badley, 48, exercised absolute control over his sect in a seaside cul-de-sac, abusing and exploiting helpless children as sex toys for more than a decade. He was found guilty yesterday of 35 sex offenses against children and young adults. Yet social services were alerted to Badley's child abuse in 2002, and took no action. As a consequence, the former Tesco security guard was allowed to continue preying on the young and vulnerable for a further 8 years, with the full support of wife Elaine. At their semi in Kidwelly, South Wales, he would dress in hooded robes, chant before an altar and then orchestrate or participate in group sex with his female followers, including Jacqueline Marling and Shelley Miller. One helpless girl was initiated when she was just 11 and threatened with death by cult assassins if she did not comply. At least 2 of his young victims gave birth as a result of the systematic and prolonged abuse. Yesterday at Swansea Crown Court, Marling, 42, and Elaine Badley, 47, were found guilty of 5 counts including sexual activity and indecency towards children. Miller, 35, was found guilty of 2 similar charges. Another woman, Sandra Iveson, was found not guilty of gross indecency. Colin Badley's home was a typical semi in a typical cul-de-sac. But to the stream of visitors who trooped through the front door, especially on Sunday nights, it was the temple. In the lounge, a white cloth would be draped over a table to form an altar with candles and burning incense. Nearby were tanks full of snakes and satanic symbols. Those present would put on hooded robes and wear upside-down crucifixes. There would be chanting, which would always end in group sex. Children, boys and girls as young as 11, were also initiated, repeatedly sexually abused, in other words, during black masses at Badley's home. There were at least 5 victims that we know of, but police believe there could have been many more. Yet these vile activities did not disturb the neighbors. Why? Because they were involved too. They lived in houses next to or opposite each other on the outskirts of Kidwelly, population 3,000, near Carmarthen. For more than a decade Close Year Onan, Welsh for Ash Tree Close, was possibly the most depraved street in Britain. The proof was there, in black and white, on the charge sheet at Swansea Crown Court where Badley, his bisexual wife Elaine and their accomplices stood trial for a sickening catalogue of crimes. All of them perpetrated by culprits living in the same road, perhaps the single most shocking fact of all. This disturbing story begins not in Wales, however, but more than 200 miles away in East London. Badley, from Shoreditch, had a string of jobs including work as a Tesco security guard and on a fruit and vegetable stall. He also bred Rottweiler dogs and Siamese cats. His outwardly mundane existence, we now know, masked a sinister private life. He and his wife had been dabbling with the occult ever since they were married 30 years ago and were obsessed with Aleister Crowley, the most notorious Satanist of the 20th century. The self-styled Great Beast. One of Crowley's publications, the Book of the Law, includes the passage, "Let all chaste women be despised." Sex with anyone is not just permissible but to be encouraged. And this, some of the most passionate and permanent attachments have begun with rape. Rome was founded thereon. Apart from anything else, the Book of the Law provided justification for the couple's own open marriage. Batley had sent a photo of his wife to the Reader's Wives section of a pornographic magazine, and this had led to them meeting others for group activities, the jury was told. They included former dental nurse Jacqueline Marling and prostitute Shelley Miller, who both joined Batley's occult circle. They were given matching tattoos of the Eye of Horus, the Egyptian falcon god depicted pecking out the eyes of Christ in Crowley's works, and addressed Batley as "My Lord." Police found him listed under this name on Miller's mobile phone. Such was Batley's control over his wretched coven that they had to pay him 25% of their income. Every time Miller entertained a client, she would send Batley a text message to tell him how much she had been paid. She had sex with more than 3,000 clients over a 2-year period, making about £2,000 a month, a quarter of which went to him. It explained how Batley, officially unemployed, could afford a £45,000 caravan and frequent holidays abroad. Batley would later claim that he moved to Wales for health reasons, to escape the smog. A claim rather undermined by the fact that his coven also relocated to the Principality. Police believe there was another reason for the exodus. They suspect that other members of the cult, who have not been identified, were based in Wales. The first East Londoner to arrive in Kidwelly was twice married mother of 4 Sandra Iveson in 1995. The following year, the Batleys moved in. 2 years later, Marling became their next-door neighbor, and Miller, 35, an unmarried mother of 2 who was brought up a Catholic, completed the set. Did other residents have any inkling of the kind of people that were now living among them? Well, with hindsight, there were a few small clues. John Wheatland and his wife Marion, both in their 70s, couldn't help but notice how Colin Batley was over at Shelley's all the time. On another occasion, the Wheatlands encountered Miller and another woman kissing and touching each other in the supermarket. Yet they could not have imagined the extent of what was really going on behind the closed curtains of the so-called temple. During occult gatherings, it became the set of a horror movie. Batley, in a hooded robe, would read out extracts from the Book of the Law, which had been typed out and laminated by his wife. Hanging above him on the wall was a gold ceremonial dagger, and sitting menacingly nearby were his 2 Rottweilers, Tutankhamun and Seakaith. One young victim told how Batley introduced her to the cult by raping her when she was 11, telling her that having sex with him was a test, and if she did not pass she would go to the abyss. The victim, now in her 20s, told the court, "I did not want him to do what he was doing, but I did not have a choice because what Colin said happened." What Colin said went. The abuse continued for years. As a teenager she became pregnant by Batley, who prevented her from having an abortion, saying that babies belonged to the cult and not to their mothers. Another victim, now in her 30s, said she was forced to have sex with Batley when she was 15. She was also ordered to perform sex acts on his wife and other men and women. "I was told I'd be killed if I didn't become part of the cult," she said. Colin Batley had a gun and brought it to meetings. I was so scared I just did what I was told. I was in the living room at his home and he told me there would be an initiation. I was called upstairs. Elaine was there. He would just snap his fingers and say, "Strip." She said that on one occasion when she was 16, she was made to have sex with a boy of 15, as Marling filmed them. The girl was told she would be murdered by cult assassins if she did not give in to Badley's demands. Through a video link, she sobbed as she told how she was taken to other addresses by Badley where she had sex with other men. "I did it because I was told to by Colin." Another woman victim said she was recruited into the cult and became pregnant after becoming a sexual plaything for the group. Badley ordered her not to abort her occult child. One male victim said that, as a teenager, he was tricked into having sex with Badley's wife. The witness recalled how Badley promised to set him up with a girl and directed him to a dark bedroom. Once inside, he got into bed and then realized that the other person lying beside him was Elaine Badley. One of the charges against Shelley Miller was that she seduced a boy of 15. Miller claimed he was 16, and that she was teaching him how to have sex as he had a new girlfriend he wanted to impress. She had sex with him twice in Badley's caravan in Tenby. Badley, it emerged during the trial, had been reported to Carmarthenshire Social Services in 2002 by a concerned relative. She said Badley had been abused by his own father and that history was about to repeat itself. The warning went unheeded, allowing Badley and his cult to prey on youngsters week after week, month after month for another 8 years. One man spoke of the anger at the way a group of outsiders from London had stained the town's character. "Nobody understands how so many of them could come down and all end up living in one place in the town," he said. "They must have planned it somehow. I don't think Kidwelly is to blame for what has gone on. They kept a very low profile." He said he preferred not to give his name because he felt the cult would still be operating in the area. But Geraint Thomas, Kidwelly Town Council clerk, predicted that the community would quickly rise above its problems. Colin Badley's son Damien died on the February 1, 2008, when he accidentally hanged himself during a sex act. He filmed the fatal accident on his mobile phone. An inquest was told he was found naked and hanging. A neighbor said Damien's father, Colin Badley, was laughing and joking like he didn't have a care in the world on the day of the funeral, which no normal person could comprehend. According to the Cult Information Center's General Secretary Ian Hayworth, the Kidwelly rape cult had the characteristics that are typical of a cult, which he had heard year after year in the 32 years I've worked full-time in this field. He estimated the UK has 500 to 1,000 cults, with these operating in major cities and in quiet, rural areas. Hayworth added that cult leaders often break people down, sometimes within 3 or 4 days, with methods including depriving them of food and sleep. He said this seems to work best on people with very healthy minds. The sexual abuse was often preceded with satanic ceremonies in which passages from the occultist Aleister Crowley's books The Book of the Law, The Book of Magic and Equinox of the Gods were read out. One ceremony featured an altar with salted bread, a chalice of red wine and an incense burner. At the end of these satanic ceremonies, members became skiclad, meaning they disrobed and had sex. A neighbor, John Wheatland, saw a girl in her early teens done up to look like a film star who asked him, "Do you want sex?" and he heard a victim crying every night. In 2010, 2 adult victims, one male and one female, reported the cult's abuse to the police, prompting the group's arrest the same year. Chief Inspector Richard Lewis said the investigation by Deep Powys Police was a very protracted and complicated inquiry involving a very secretive group that perpetrated systematic and prolonged abuse of children who showed great courage by reporting it. Mark Bergmansky, Detective Chief Inspector, agreed it was a very complicated and complex inquiry. Kidwelly sex cult is not the only very complicated and complex inquiry Deep Powys Police have come up against. A man from South Wales that cannot be named to protect the lifelong anonymity afforded to his victims was jailed for 33 years in 2019 for serious sexual offences against 3 of his daughters. Spanning 20 years, one of whom was also his granddaughter. He frequently raped his daughters from the ages of 12, 13, or 14, fathering 6 of his own grandchildren with one. He also arranged for other men to rape his daughters. He groomed and controlled his daughters by invoking magic. He immersed them in a false world involving witchcraft and mysticism. He convinced them that they were receiving emails from a psychic named Amelia Sanctuary, which were really from him. The messages demanded sex with him and with other men. On the February 27, 2016, a Scottish website and newspaper called The National reported the story headlined, "When Evil Visited Orkney, untold story of ritual child abuse allegations on the island. On February 27, 1991, a fleet of cars set off in convoy from Kirkwall on the Orkney mainland. It was barely light as they drove across the Churchill barriers to the island of South Ronaldsay. They wanted to be sure that the children they were going to collect were still at home. From the outcry they incurred later, you'd have thought they were kidnappers holding families to ransom. Not police and social workers trying to protect children from one of the most vicious forms of child abuse humans have yet devised, satanic ritual abuse, SRA. Before Orkney there was a group of traveling families in Ayrshire whose children started talking about family abuse. One said he and his brothers had been filmed touching adults' wuggies and bums. They were taken into care and there were endless court processes examining the evidence. A few years earlier there was a kind of consensus among social workers that children didn't lie about stuff like that. And at first no one doubted the Ayrshire children. Forensic evidence backed up many of the things they said. One described his aunt crawling up his body and extracting 2 of his back teeth with a pair of big long scissors. A doctor from Glasgow Children's Dental Hospital confirmed that the outer enamel of his teeth had come out in a neat, clean break that was highly unusual and could have been caused by using an instrument. But 5 years after the initial charges had been made, the parents were granted leave to petition for novel officium, the ultimate appeal in Scots law. Evidence which had been accepted for 5 years was suddenly thrown into question. A new sheriff said the child who'd started the whole process off was a devious, manipulative little boy and should be sent back home, despite admitting that it is possible that this has been a case of child abuse. By then the tide had turned. After a number of years of sensational convictions, there was suddenly a consensus among the media and the judiciary that there was no such thing as Satanism. There were lying children, of course. There were also hysterical social workers, who, despite years of professional training, had all been swept up in a craze for madcap American thinking. And there were only innocent parents, poor victims whose children had been snatched from them and who must have their little darlings restored to them immediately. The family as the primary social unit was not to be questioned again. Britain's newspapers would make sure of that. The children in Ayrshire were sent home, and so were the children who'd been removed from their homes in Orkney. They'd been taken to the mainland and housed with foster families in Highland region and in Strathclyde. There, they said the most bizarre things. One 9-year-old boy directed a play in which the minister was shown wearing split trousers revealing his bare backside, which the boy then hid. A 7-year-old girl in a different foster family became uncharacteristically aggressive when she was told she was going home and smashed a doll on the ground. She said she didn't want to go and stood like a wooden doll refusing to get dressed. Such strange behavior proves nothing, of course, though the fact there was so much of it in children from different accused families might surely have given the authorities pause for thought. Instead, Sheriff David Kelby sent the children home without testing the evidence in court. This decision was criticized by the Law Society of Scotland and by Lord Clyde in his inquiry into the case, but that fact has been ignored for 25 years. To the extent that even as respected a news outlet as the BBC can report that the parents in Orkney were innocent. Innocent till proven guilty? Yes, but innocent beyond the shadow of a doubt. That, the Orkney parents can never claim. There seems to be a lot of confusion surrounding nearly every case of satanic ritual abuse, and in my opinion this is due to a number of reasons. One reason is obvious, and that is many of these victims are or were children at the time of the abuse. Children are impressionable and can be manipulated, but why would so many social workers want to force children into start telling such far-out stories? Social workers are regularly blamed for these accusations due to their bad interviewing techniques and sometimes their own personal religious beliefs. But the confusion seems to run deeper. When investigating satanic ritual abuse, it is hard not to notice that so many cases seem to involve retracted statements, manipulation of the children's minds. Large groups of people. This fact seems to make the children's stories even more far-fetched and even harder to believe or prove right as experts. Even those that are knowledgeable on the subject and do believe some of what the children say might underestimate the potential scale and power of these cults. Another reason for confusion is court gagging orders, journalists not being allowed to report facts and cover-ups performed to protect certain high-profile individuals. Tactics used to discredit cases of satanic ritual abuse does include promoting known fantasists and liars only to bring them down in public view. Intimidating witnesses like social workers and police whom are worried about losing their jobs and careers. Former police detective John Wedger, who claims he was threatened and bullied out of his job for exposing the high-level cover-up of child prostitution. And journalist Sonia Poulton, both rare exceptions to the rule. People like Cyril Smith and Jimmy Savile were protected by friends in high places. Jimmy Savile was close friends with British Prime Minister at the time Margaret Thatcher, whom he used to regularly spend Christmas with, as well as being close friends with Prince Charles after being bought into the royal circles by Lord Mountbatten. FionaBarnett.org writes Lord Louis Mountbatten was close friends with Jimmy Savile. Mountbatten and Savile are linked to the investigation of Kincora Boys' Home in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Joseph Mains, the warden of Kincora Boys' Home, prostituted boys to British VIPs. He drove Kincora boys to Classybon Castle on Mullaghmore Harbour in County Sligo, on Ireland's west coast, for Lord Mountbatten to rape. Mountbatten holidayed at Classybon Castle every summer for 30 years, until the IRA assassinated him in 1979 by bombing his boat in Mullaghmore Harbour. Rumours persist that Northern Ireland's IRA assassinated Mountbatten because he took advantage of Northern Irish care home boys. Consistent with their VIP child trafficking cover-up, the British press completely ignored the Savile Mountbatten-Kincora connection when reporting on the August 2019 launch of Andrew Loney's sensational biography, The Mountbattens. Group of women who say they were abused by Sir Edward Heath also claim their parents ran a satanic sex cult that was involved in 16 child murders. The woman claimed that the former Prime Minister was part of a paedophile ring. They say that the cult regularly slaughtered children as ritual sacrifices in church. If the allegations are true, it would make the cult the worst child murderers in British history. A group of women who say Sir Edward Heath abused them as children have also accused their parents of being involved in up to 16 murders. The Daily Mail claimed the farce came as police probe incredible claims that the former Prime Minister was linked to a paedophile ring that killed as many as 16 children, which would make them the worst child murderers in British history. The seemingly far-fetched allegations have been made by a family who allege that the politician was part of a satanic sex cult run by their own parents. They say that the cult regularly slaughtered children as ritual sacrifices in churches and forests around southern England and also participated in similar ceremonies in Africa. They claim their mother and father, who is said to have known the former Conservative leader, were responsible for slaughtering children ranging from babies to teenagers, yet they evaded justice. The paedophile ring, which they say Sir Edward was part of, stabbed, tortured, and maimed youngsters in churches and burnt babies in satanic orgies before men. Women and children gorged themselves on blood and body parts, police have been told. If the bizarre allegations were to be proved, the parents who allegedly led the killings would be responsible for murdering more children than Fred and Rose West. They would also be on a par with Thomas Hamilton, who shot dead 16 children in the 1996 Dunblane School massacre. The women's lurid claims were dismissed by police in 1989 when they came forward. Sir Edward's name was never mentioned to police at the time. It was only last year that he was named for the first time after one of the claimants said she had remembered a man called Ed was a prime mover in a network of pedophile abusers. But there is no suggestion that Sir Edward killed any children himself in the women's accounts. Wiltshire police have spent more than a year investigating the allegations as part of an inquiry that has cost taxpayers over £883,431 and irretrievably tarnished the reputation of the unmarried politician, who died in 2005, aged 89. Sir Edward's godson, Lincoln Seligman, said, "I understand that these claims from the 1980s were at the time dismissed as complete fantasy by police. It is disappointing that these wild allegations have been reheated and randomly attached to Edward Heath's name. A Wiltshire police spokesman said, "We are not prepared to discuss this as this is an ongoing investigation." Wiltshire Chief Constable Mike Vila was reported to believe child abuse allegations against the late politician, which include lurid tales of satanic child slaughter, are totally convincing. Mr. Vila, whose force has been investigating the claims for 18 months, is also said to believe that Sir Edward was a pedophile whose crimes were covered up. Satanic ritual abuse allegations in Britain are much older than most people realize, and it was not always the locals that were blamed. The first recorded presence of Jewish in Norwich is the year 1134. In the 1144, the Jews of Norwich were accused of ritual murder after a boy, William of Norwich, was found dead with stab wounds. It is the first known medieval accusation against Jews of ritual murder. Shortly before his murder, William's mother was approached by a man who claimed to be a cook working for the Archdeacon of Norwich. He offered William a job in the Archdeacon's kitchens. William's mother was paid 3 shillings to let her son go. William later visited his aunt in the company of this man. His aunt was apparently suspicious, and asked her daughter to follow them after they left. They were then seen entering the house of a local Jew. This was the last time William was seen alive. It was Holy Tuesday. William's hagiographer, Thomas of Monmouth, claimed that every year there is an international council of Jews at which they choose the country in which a child will be killed during Easter. Because of a Jewish prophecy that states that the killing of a Christian child each year will ensure that the Jews will be restored to the Holy Land. In 1144, England was chosen, and the leaders of the Jewish community delegated the Jews of Norwich to perform the killing. They then abducted and crucified William. The legend was turned into a cult, with William acquiring the status of a martyr and pilgrims bringing offerings to the local church. This was followed by similar accusations in Gloucester, 1168, Bury St. Edmunds, 1181, and Bristol, 1183. In 1189, the Jewish deputation attending the coronation of Richard the Lionheart was attacked by the crowd. Massacres of Jews at London and York soon followed. In 1190 on March 16, 150 Jews were attacked in York and then massacred when they took refuge in the royal castle, where Clifford's Tower now stands, with some committing suicide rather than being taken by the mob. The remains of 17 bodies thrown in a well in Norwich between the 12th and 13th century, 5 that were shown by DNA testing to likely be members of a single Jewish family, were very possibly killed as part of one of these pogroms. After the death of little Saint Hugh of Lincoln, there were trials and executions of Jews. The case is mentioned by Matthew Paris and Chaucer, and thus has become well known. Its notoriety sprang from the intervention of the Crown, the first time an accusation of ritual killing had been given royal credibility. The 8-year-old Hugh disappeared at Lincoln on July 31, 1255. His body was thought to be discovered on August 29, in a well. A Jew named Copin or Coppin confessed to involvement. He confessed to John of Lexington, a servant of the Crown, and relative of the Bishop of Lincoln. He is said to have confessed that the boy had been crucified by the Jews, who had assembled at Lincoln for that purpose. King Henry III, who had reached Lincoln at the beginning of October, had Copin executed and 91 of the Jews of Lincoln seized and sent up to London, where 18 of them were executed. The rest were pardoned at the intercession of the Franciscans or Dominicans. Within a few decades, Jews would be expelled from all of England in 1290 and not allowed to return until 1657. Charles Walton was well known to the people of Lower Quinton, England. But it was for a reason that some considered peculiar. He appeared to be able to communicate with animals, feeding birds out of his own hand and commanding wild animals with his voice. On Valentine's Day in 1945, at the age of 74, Walton met a brutal end. He was found with his throat cut, a pitchfork pinning him into the ground and a cross carved into his chest. Rumors surrounding his death were mostly based on the theory that he was a witch who had cast a spell on someone, and to break it, the subject killed him. The circumstance became even stranger when police found a book called Folklore, Old Customs, and Superstitions in Shakespeareland. The book told the story of a man named Charles Walton, who died in 1865 after an apparent ghost sighting. This led many in the village to believe that the two Charles Waltons were the same person. No one was ever arrested for his murder, and the case remains a baffling mystery. At first the investigation was handled by a local superintendent named Alex Spooner. He uncovered some very strange coincidences. Ann Tennant was a resident of Long Compton, 15 miles from Lower Quinton, and was murdered at the age of 80. On September 15, 1875, at about 8 o'clock in the evening, Ann Tennant left her house to buy a loaf of bread. On her way back, she met some farm workers returning home from harvesting in the fields. One of the group was a local man, James Haywood, who had known Ann's family for many years. Haywood was simple-minded and was seen as something akin to a village idiot. It is known that he had also been drinking cider. Without warning, he attacked Ann Tennant with a pitchfork, stabbing her in the legs and head. Haywood claimed that Ann was a witch and that there were other witches in the village whom he intended to deal with in the same way. Although committed to trial for murder, he was found not guilty on the grounds of insanity and spent the rest of his life in Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum. He is recorded as dying there, at the age of 59. There was also supposedly uncovered by Spooner repeated sightings of a spectral black dog in the area made by a young boy named, of all things, Charles Walton. Thought to be perhaps one and the same as who had died. The boy had apparently seen the dog several nights in a row, after which he saw an apparition of a headless woman that eerily coincided with the time of his sister's death. It was even speculated that Tennant was actually related to Walton somehow. Spooner also uncovered that the area of the murder, Meehan Hill, was steeped in dark tales of witchcraft. The hill apparently had long been surrounded by tales of the occult and black magic rituals, going all the way back to the days of the Celts. And it seemed as if sightings of ghostly black dogs had long been common in the area. Spooner began to wonder if there was something more paranormal in nature going on, and if Walton had been murdered because someone had thought of him as a practitioner of witchcraft. This was all information that Spooner would pass on to a pair of detectives from Scotland Yard brought in to investigate the case. By the names of Chief Inspector Robert Fabian and Detective Sergeant Albert Webb, giving them as evidence a book called Folklore, Old Customs, and Superstitions in Shakespeare Land, which held all of these outlandish tales, but the detectives tended to believe they were just dealing with a run-of-the-mill psychopath. A look into Walton's background turned up some interesting details, such as the fact that he had lost a large amount of wealth since 1927, when he had become a widower. During that time his savings had inexplicably plummeted from a healthy sum down to nearly nothing, and no one could figure out where all that money had gone or why. The two detectives also questioned locals who, although wary and seemingly scared of something, nevertheless painted a very bizarre picture of what they believed to be going on. Some claimed that Walton's preternatural ability with animals was due to a proficiency with witchcraft, and that there had been whispers of the elderly man walking about in the dead of night on mysterious errands. There were rumors that Walton was suspected of having carried out magic rituals to hex and blight the land to rob it of its fertility and to sicken livestock. With a crop failure in 1944 blamed on him by some, and 2 dead heifers had allegedly been found in the days before the murder. There were even rumors that some areas had been overrun with large natterjack toads, said to be a sure sign of hexing, integral to the spell, and which Walton was said to have kept as pets. Talk of the enigmatic black dogs also came up again, with several locals claiming to have seen the creatures in the days surrounding Walton's death. It was also found that the date of Walton's death had fallen on a day of the Fabian calendar that was called Candlemas Day, and which was also the pagan festival of Imbolc, with the day supposedly considered to be the perfect time for performing a blood sacrifice. It was thought that Walton may have perhaps been killed to stop his witchcraft and to use his blood to replenish the earth. Indeed, even the method of death, with the throat slashed and the body pinned by a pitchfork, was considered a traditional way to kill a witch. To top it all off, a large black dog was purportedly found dead and strung up on a tree nearby the location where Walton's body was found. Throughout the strange investigation, rumors of witchcraft would persistently hang in the background, and some odd leads along these lines came in as well. One was a letter sent to police and the local paper by someone calling themselves Mrs. Jones. The mysterious author of the letter claimed that she was the former lover of the famous occultist, Aleister Crowley, and also a witch, and that her coven had been the one that had murdered Walton in a blood ritual. But this confession was largely dismissed and was not pursued to any appreciable degree. Although the letter added to the rumors of black magic surrounding the case, authorities were still largely skeptical of such superstitions, claims of myth and magic, and ignored most leads concerning these things. One of the main suspects at the time was the last man to have seen Walton alive, the farmer Albert Potter. Upon questioning about the day of the crime, Potter gave some rather contradictory information, saying that he had seen Walton out working with a sleeved shirt, even though the body had been dressed in a jacket and sleeveless work shirt when it had been found. Potter also claimed that his fingerprints had been on the murder weapons, and that this was because he had been with the first to come across the body and had inspected the scene before police arrived. Yet no such fingerprints had been found because they had been thoroughly wiped off by someone. His time frame of events and amount paid to Walton for his work also did not really add up. But despite all of these inconsistencies, there was no real motive that could be found other than a rumor that Potter had borrowed money from Walton. And with no concrete evidence to charge him with, he was never arrested in connection with the murder. At the time, Fabian seemingly highly suspected he was the killer. Over the years, Fabian seems to have changed his mind to an extent. In addition to admitting to his own black dog experience, he would later write of his suspicion that perhaps there was something to all of the superstitious tales. A full 25 years after he was off the case, Fabian would even write of the Walton murder in his book The Anatomy of Crime thus: "I advise anybody who is tempted at any time to venture into black magic, witchcraft, Shamanism call it what you will, to remember Charles Walton and to think of his death, which was clearly the ghastly climax of a pagan rite. There is no stronger argument for keeping as far away as possible from the villains with their swords, incense, and mumbo-jumbo. It is prudence on which your future peace of mind and even your life could depend. It is now 2020, and despite vast amounts of information now being accessible, most people are still living their lives in ignorance of their real surroundings. While the average person goes to work, raises a family and attempts to live life as peacefully as possible, they are too busy to notice that Satanists surround them. Every now and again these people are given a glance of actual reality, but the outlandish nature of the claims means that most ignore and dismiss them. In just the last few years we have seen a huge alleged cover-up in Hampstead in the UK as well as Pizzagate in the USA. Despite a full blackout by the mainstream media and strict censorship laws enforced in the USA and UK, every now and then one of these stories leak. And when they leak, we are given a small but very dark and disturbing look into the world of Satanism, child sacrifice and human trafficking. The mainstream media dismiss a connection to Satanism, government, and the ruling elite. False memories, lies, dodgy therapy and a whole host of other reasons are given to explain these so-called false accusations. And the internet is blamed for spreading the lies. According to Wikipedia, the Cleveland child abuse scandal was a 1987 wave of suspected child sexual abuse cases, many of which were later discredited, in Cleveland, England. In the years prior to the scandal, levels of reported child abuse in the Cleveland area were consistent with those of other parts of the United Kingdom. However, in 1987, during the period of February to July, many children living in Cleveland were removed from their homes by social service agencies and diagnosed as sexually abused. The 121 diagnoses were made by two pediatricians at a Middlesbrough hospital, Marietta Higgs and Jeffrey Wyatt, using the later discredited diagnostic of reflex anal dilation. When there were not enough foster homes in which to place the allegedly abused children, social services began to house the children in a ward at the local hospital. Later, the test being used to establish child abuse was contested by the area police surgeon, and cooperation between the social workers, police and hospital doctors involved in diagnosis began to disintegrate. In addition, there was public concern regarding the practices being used by the local social service agency, such as the removal of children from their homes in the middle of the night. In May 1987, parents marched from the hospital where their children were being held to the local newspaper. The resulting media coverage caused the social service agency's practices to receive public scrutiny and criticism in response. The Butler-Sloss report was commissioned by the Secretary of State for Social Services in July 1987 and published in 1988. The report was led by Elizabeth Butler-Sloss, and it concluded that most of the diagnoses were incorrect. As a result, 94 of the 121 children were returned to their homes. An editorial in The Lancet concluded, "By their bull-headed approach, Dr. Higgs and Dr. Wyatt have set back the cause they sought to promote." In July 1988, 6 MPs tabled a House of Commons motion for charges of indecent assault and conspiracy to be brought against Higgs and Wyatt. On October 14, 1991, the Children Act 1989 was implemented in full as a result of the Cleveland child abuse scandal and other child-related events that preceded it. Tuesday, February 28, 1995, The Independent reported. A 15-year-old girl who was one of the 8 Ayrshire youngsters taken into care after their parents were wrongly accused of ritual sex abuse, was reunited with her mother and father last night. The parents, who cannot be named for legal reasons, said they were delighted that their years of hell and injustice had come to an end. They described their immense relief at yesterday's ruling in the Court of Session in Edinburgh that all the Ayrshire children should return home. They bitterly criticized the social workers whose investigations in 1990 led to the initial care orders. The Strathclyde Social Work Department had failed to learn the lessons of the Cleveland child sex abuse scandal in 1987, they said. Like other parents, I handed my girl to these people for tests, the girl's father said. They said I would get her back in 2 or 3 days, and it was 5 years. 5 years in which she was crying in the dark. The Ayrshire case is the latest sex abuse scandal in which children have been returned to their families after abuse allegations have turned out to be unfounded. Following highly publicized cases in Cleveland, Orkney, and Rochdale, new guidelines have been issued to social workers investigating abuse claims. Government researchers have disputed the very existence of satanic abuse. The Ayrshire case began when the mother of one of the 8 children asked social workers to investigate claims that her husband had abused her 3 children. The allegations led to a major police investigation into a sex abuse ring involving 70 adults and children. After initial examinations, 4 boys and 4 girls, then aged from 10 months to 11 years, from 3 closely related families, were removed by social workers using place of safety orders. At an initial hearing in Ayr in August 1990, Sheriff Neil Gow QC found that the children had been sexually abused or were members of a household where a child had been abused. Sheriff Gow said there was evidence of sinister elements of sadism, ritualism, and torture. Warning that the public must be alerted to extreme depravities and appalling practices, he referred the case to a Scottish children's panel. It made the 8 youngsters the subject of supervision orders and they were taken into care. The families protested their innocence, pointing out that despite exhaustive police inquiries no one had been charged with any offense. With the help of lawyers, they began to compile new evidence which challenged Sheriff Gow's findings. Evidence from expert medical witnesses, who had experience of the Cleveland and Orkney cases, indicated that social workers who examined the children were inadequately trained, had asked leading questions, and that medical examinations were flawed. In 1997, a controversial television documentary, The Death of Childhood, claimed that independent experts under the guidance of the Department of Health later found that at least 70% of the diagnoses were correct. According to the documentary, 2 years after the scandal, a number of children were again referred to social services and determined to be at risk for child abuse. In February 2007, Sir Liam Donaldson, the chief medical officer, who was the regional medical officer at the time of the scandal, said of the original diagnoses, "The techniques that have been used have not been reliable and it does look as if some mistakes have been made." A few days later, Two of the children who had been the focus of the scandal asked the Middlesbrough police for an investigation of their 1987 experience. Lindsay Wise said, "My mother and father were accused of an unspeakable offense. It has almost destroyed their lives. My father was never strong enough to work again. My mother can never forget the trauma of nearly losing her children. Now I want answers. I want an apology. I will not be silenced." Her sister Paula said, "We were abused by the very people, the doctors and social workers there to protect children. We were put up for adoption. Now we want to know why." The television documentary, The Death of Childhood, claims the techniques that were used were still regularly used at the time of the making of the documentary and were also used by the FBI. There were allegations of Satan ritual abuse made, and many were retracted later, involving many local families, and according to doctors, many of the children in question shown signs of being sexual abused when medically examined. The media and the people involved now claim that the doctors got it wrong and that most the children were not sexual abused. The ritual abuse allegations were said to have been created by social workers and drilled into the children's heads until they believed and repeated it. The Cleveland child abuse scandal, along with a similar case in Nottingham, would begin a new wave of allegations of satanic and ritualistic abuse of children in Rochdale, Orkney and many other places. On the July 6, 2013, a woman I will not mention by name wrote Nottingham Police this request. Dear Nottinghamshire Police, in October 1987 children were removed from their families in Nottingham, and in February 1989 a Broxtow family was charged with multi-generational child sexual abuse and neglect. A 600-page report on the incident was produced, and later a revised report was produced. Please send me copies of both reports. Please can you state what was the outcome of the charges? On the July 31st, Nottinghamshire Police responded. I write in connection with your request for information, which was received by Nottinghamshire Police on July 8, 2013. Following receipt of your request, searches were conducted within Nottinghamshire Police to locate the information you require. Please find below answers to your questions. Response under S1, 1A, of the Freedom of Information Act 2000, FOIA, I can confirm that Nottinghamshire Police does not hold the information you have requested. Despite not having the information requested, which is strange, but they did advise her to visit this joint inquiry report. The highlights of the report reads: in October 1987, children of an extended family in Nottinghamshire were removed from home on suspicion that they had been sexually abused by their parents and relatives. In February 1989, 10 adults, both male and female, appeared at Nottingham Crown Court charged with 53 offences of incest, indecent assault and cruelty against 21 of the children of their extended family, and extensive terms of imprisonment were imposed. It is generally agreed that this was the most serious case of multi-generational sexual abuse within an extended family known in Britain. The successful prosecution was the culmination of inquiries made by both police and social services personnel cooperating together into what became known as the Broxtow case, Nottingham. It resulted in considerable praise from the media, local councillors and even the Prime Minister for the efforts of the police and social workers after the Crown Court judge made named commendations in respect of the involved personnel. The children had been made wards of court before the criminal proceedings commenced, and the judge gave permission for the children to be interviewed by psychiatrists instructed by the parties. Any further interviews by social workers or the police would have required the court's further permission. This was a sensitive time as the furor over Cleveland had erupted 3 months previously. The children's foster parents were asked to keep diaries of anything they said or did that might be relevant to their future welfare. These diaries formed part of the evidence provided to the wardship court, which resulted in all the children being committed to the care of the local authority. The disclosures made in these diaries indicated very extensive sexual abuse. They also appeared to suggest that the children had been subjected to something more than sexual abuse, as the children talked about witch parties, the murder of babies, the killing of animals, the involvement of strangers, and of being taken elsewhere to be abused. Nothing like the content of these diaries had ever been seen before, and they eventually gave rise to the suspicion that the children might have been involved in some form of organized ritualistic, satanic abuse or witchcraft cult. Adult members of the extended family were interviewed by social workers and appeared to support this view. The police set up a separate unilateral investigation into these further revelations after a senior social worker made a statement. The social workers were not invited or encouraged to take part in this investigation, which was called Gollum. The social workers have stated that they had little idea as to what, if anything, was actually being investigated. When the police reported in their findings that they did not consider satanic abuse or witchcraft was involved, or that there were any other perpetrators, this was not accepted by social services staff. It would appear that the social work staff had formed a view that the police had deliberately set out to discredit the corroborating adults. In their view, the police were trying to disprove and close down the investigation. They further considered that the police did not have sufficient knowledge of this type of abuse and were not prepared to acquire it. In short, the Social Services Department, having not been involved, were not satisfied that the police had undertaken a thorough investigation, and additional information the social workers acquired about tunnels at Walton Hall and a swimming pool at an identified house appeared to strengthen this opinion. The police were concerned that the information contained in the children's diaries would be on their prosecution files and, therefore, available to the defense in the criminal prosecution. They considered that there was a possibility that as potential witnesses the children and young adults would be discredited. Because of this, the police requested that no further diaries should be kept, but this ran counter to the requirements of the wardship hearing and the need to understand the children's experience if they were to be helped. By June 1988, the police refused to accept any more of the children's diaries. They indicated that they would no longer be prepared to investigate disclosures of this nature. The only exception to this was an interview conducted with children who alleged that murders had taken place on a boat. Once again, the social workers considered that the police had set out to discredit the children. Disclosures identifying locations and additional perpetrators. It is indisputable that a profound mistrust had developed, and the awareness of this was not helped by the knowledge that the Cook program would be including Nottingham in its presentation of a program on the satanic abuse of children. In April 1989, a joint memorandum outlining the social services perspective of the disclosures and inquiry work was submitted by the Principal Solicitor and Assistant Director of Children's Services to the Chief Executive. The memorandum did not express a view as to whether satanic abuse was a reality, but it did express grave concern that further children could be at risk and that it was no longer possible to investigate this. The memorandum made the point that if a child was abused as a consequence of the lack of investigation, then it would be very damaging for the local authority. The memorandum was, therefore, written to draw attention to this and compel further action. The children were not interviewed formally by social workers, but the foster parents kept diaries recording anything unusual that the children said or did. The children in the Broxtow case said and talked about the following: babies being killed by being jumped upon and then left in the garages. Babies being shot and put in the garages. Babies being taken from next door and from across the road and having their heads bashed on the floor. Babies being thrown on the bonfire. A naughty policeman killing babies. The family having dead babies hung around their necks. Babies being killed and buried in the front garden. A monster getting our babies. Digging up babies in a field. Babies being stabbed in a balloon and cooked in the oven. Killing people at witch parties. A lady and little girl being shot, chopped up and put in the river in a bin, or variant buried by the river. A hymen, living in a big castle full of sharks and boats, eating children. Jesus being chopped up and eaten off a silver pad. All their family eating a man killed in a boat, cutting him up and putting him in a bag after going to a fantastic castle in a boat with Mr. Poo Pants and the local vicar. A child being cut with a knife and being made to drink the blood put in a cup. Killing children with a knife in the stomach. One of the children's tummies being cut open by her father in the living room and then taken to hospital. The children themselves being killed and magicked better. The witches killing a baby taken out of a female member of the family's tummy and then making it better. All of the children being killed at parties. I'm Superman at the parties and I kill all the witches. We sit in a circle with the neighbor's kids, 10 of them. They stick a knife into the sheep, the witches laugh and put the blood into a jug and then uncle shoots it. Auntie brings the sheep in a cage, they stab them and put the blood in a jug. The family chopped the sheep's head off, wanted the blood to drink. A church where the murderers hang you. Being sexually abused in an underground room at the church, all the family and neighbors dressing up there as witches, clowns and ghosts. Witch parties in pubs and churches, going to hospital dressed up as witches and ghosts, clowns and monsters to abuse the babies there. The doctors and nurses watched. Doctors and nurses dressed as witches attending witch parties. Big house with little house nearby with circular raised swimming pool, secret room, 4-poster bed and grandfather clock where you are sexually abused. A red drink that makes you sleepy, a table with a purple plastic cloth with snakes, moons, stars, pigs, spiders, and donkeys on it. A member of the family putting on a cloak and flying, the children being turned into frogs by the witches. The context of the disclosures. The first fact that strikes you is that until Mr. W briefed the foster parents with the satanic indicators, all 4 children were talking entirely about their family, of which 7 are ESN. Being involved in sex and what they call witch parties. There are only vague references to strangers. The second, even more pertinent fact, is that until Mr. W's presentation of the satanic indicators, all the children are talking about sexual abuse and the witches' parties at their homes. It is not until the May 3rd, 88 that they start to talk about a big house with a swimming pool, and even then, only with reference to sexual abuse and nothing satanic. They only start to identify other locations of witch parties in July 1988 when the foster parents had been asked to take the children around to identify locations. The children all lived in typical semi-detached council houses on council estates. As we all know, the walls of these houses are paper thin. The rooms are very small, with the average living room being 14 by 12, and they have open gardens. In our experience, it is virtually impossible on council estates to keep anything secret that can be seen or heard. The neighbor states that she had seen young children naked in the garden eating their own excrement and running around the garden naked or with very little on, even on freezing cold days. She adds that any talk of witchcraft or any type of satanic practices regarding the family surprises me a great deal. I have never had or witnessed anything like that on this estate before. The neighbors do maintain that the family used to frequently return from the pub and continued parties with a lot of shouting and swearing. Despite this, the social workers have accepted that abortions were committed in the front room, that later one of the children had her stomach cut open on a table in the front room, and that Mary witnessed 7 children being killed along with acts of cannibalism. We do not consider that the belief that this could be kept secret matches basic common sense or reality. Outside of the babies and the children, sheep are large, noisy, difficult animals, and when one was slaughtered by an Indian on a council estate in Leicester, it hit the national newspaper headlines the following day. In our view, another explanation has to be sought. The diaries of individual children. Craig was only 3 years of age when he left home in December 1986 and was only 4 years of age when he was trying to recall events that could only have happened between July and December 1986, i.e. between 2½ and 3 years of age. Craig is particularly significant because he had been in care for a year before the other children, and some major themes start with him. Witches, killing sheep, babies being killed, Selena, blood in the bath, Mr. Brown. He mentions Daddy dressing up as a witch, but according to his foster parent he went to his school panto on the December 9th where an older girl was dressed as a witch, and subsequently, had never stopped talking about the family being witches who hurt him. It is clear that anybody who has hurt or frightened Craig is a witch, monster, or clown. His description of witches, who are all members of his family, is the traditional one of a young child. They fly on broomsticks, have black teeth, long sharp fingernails, long black hair, dance around singing witchy, 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 except that they also sexually abuse him. Bite his bum and poo on the carpet. In with this he mixes Dracula, soldiers, swords, and dragons and shooting with guns. Craig is the first to introduce the idea of babies and children being killed, but as you would expect of a child of this age, he has no real concept of killing or death, and quite happily and unchallenged talks about killing a baby and then it was alright, killing a relative, who is of course still alive, killing all the children at the parties, and himself killing the witches. James being killed and Rebecca being killed and made better. Craig also complains that his social worker has murdered him because she shouted at him. Likewise, Craig introduces the concept of sheep being killed with bare hands, sticks and knives, but also being taken to hospital to be made better. He clearly refers to his father being Big Mister, but this is later translated into the master who organizes the Satanic rites. After he had witnessed his foster mother giving a blood sample at hospital and on the same day watches Jaws, which contains sufficient blood and water for anybody, he accuses the foster mother of having a bath full of blood, a theme that he pursues for some months. It is clear that Craig has a fascination and strong identification with Superman, and in March talks about Superman's girlfriend being Lena, actually Lois Lane or Miss Lane. His speech is never clear, and on questioning he answers Lena, which becomes Selena because of the significance in the literature of a Selena as a satanic figure. Likewise he mentions a little puppet but corrects himself. This was translated by social workers into puppet, as these are the dolls that witches are supposed to stick pins in, although they are actually moppets. In March Craig is talking about the black staff at his nursery, an Indian lady, and in May he begins to talk about Mrs. Brown. In May he is the first child to identify locations away from the family home, a church where the murderers hang you and the house with the swimming pool. Charles, he was only 21 months old when he left home to be placed in the same foster home as his brother. Not surprisingly, he says very little except that on the July 7, 1988 he claims that his daddy took a baby up in a balloon and stabbed it and then cooked it. His foster mother records that on the August 31, 1988, after his social worker left, he had talked non-stop about ghosts and snakes. His only other comment was in June 1988 when he passed the church at the back of Wallaton Park, previously identified by the other children, and stated that it was the Devil's Church. James was the oldest child at 7 years 4 months when he left home, but is ESN. As with Craig's diary, November, December 1987 and January, February 1988 he talks exclusively about his family being monsters, witches, and clowns who hit and burn him at their homes. He has the same concept of witches as Craig and claims that they have curly black hair and broomsticks. He tends to agree with Rebecca or is prompted by leading questions, e.g. shown Book of Animals, asked about sheep at witch parties, asked about strange men at witch parties, asked about house with swimming pool, asked about Tony, asked about Mr. Brown, asked about going to a farm and the boat. Interestingly, he tells his foster mother that Rebecca was wrong about the babies. Of similar age to his sister and in the same foster home with her, his disclosing cannot be separated from Rebecca's, as it is clear that the foster mother discusses things with them together. James claimed that Mary was present at the witch parties, which she now denies. Rebecca, as with James, starts to talk about the family having witch parties at home in July 1988, 2 months after Craig. However, it is Rebecca on the March 5, 1988 who first tells about being taken in a car with a driver who is a stranger to a house where they are sexually abused in a secret bedroom and videoed. She is supported by James on the March 17, 1988, who talks about 2 large houses with swimming pools and the children being transported by taxi. Lily confirms this and adds that they go in the car with Uncle Brown. These diaries March-May 1988, in which they talk about an unknown place and strangers, are interesting in that only sexual abuse is described without any mention of witchcraft parties. Slaughter of animals, babies, etc. It is the only part of the diaries that has received any sort of corroboration, to the extent that one of the prisoners, when interviewed in prison, claimed that his wife had a friend called Mr. Brown, who went off with her and the children, and that she had another friend called Roy who was a taxi driver. There must be a suspicion that the children might have been taken elsewhere to be abused by pedophiles, although reference should be made to the section influences on the children. Unfortunately, this information was never extracted together, and the children were never interviewed by social workers or police to ascertain whether they could tell a coherent story of what, when, who, where, how, etc. If they were abused in this way with the involvement of strangers, it could have happened only 6 months previously. Rebecca's diaries for April and May 1988 are missing, and we next find her talking about other locations where witch parties took place in August 1988 after questioning by her foster mother. At this stage she claims that her father cut her stomach open in the living room and that the doctors and nurses at the hospital were witches who came to the witch parties at the Archway, Wallaton Park. At this point it is worth commenting on the cutting up and stabbing of children in a council house living room. We know that Rebecca had previously been to hospital and had an operation scar on her stomach identified as his by the surgeon. Subsequently, in the desire to believe Rebecca, it was suggested that Satanists were clever people and that they had cut her along the same scar so it could not be noticed. We know that this is medically impossible. All surgeons can recognize their own operations, and scar tissue does not heal, or if it does would be puckered and very distorted. If you had watched too many westerns in which bullets are cut out shoulders, you might believe that operations could be conducted successfully in a dirty council sitting room. However, in reality it is doubtful whether a GP could do this without serious medical consequences, and even a skilled surgeon with sterilized instruments and trained nurse would have difficulty in a non-sterile room, never mind in the middle of a witch party. Likewise, in believing the children, there appears to be little conception of the consequences of stabbing and mutilating animals or children. We have been told that plastic sheeting would be put on the floor, assuming that all the furniture had been taken out, but blood under pressure, as any policeman knows, would splatter the walls and ceiling extensively, and the smell of mutilated babies in wheelie bins or garages would be overpowering. In our view, there is no way that this sort of practice could take place in a semi-detached council house undetected. Initially, Rebecca talked about dolls, not real babies. Rebecca claimed that Mary was present at the witch parties, which is now denied by Mary Kelly. Her diaries are missing, but in any case, as the youngest of the B children, she would tend to agree with her brother and sister. Lily was aged 5 years when she left home with Maggie and joined her older sister Anna, who had been in care for 8 years. In the diaries for November, December 1987 and January, she is consistent with Craig, Rebecca, and James in identifying home and the family. Except that she talks about parties but not specifically witches. The main content during this period is of the family at home burning her with sticks. After Mr. W.'s presentation on the February 9, 1988, she talks on the February 19, 1988 about the murder of babies and the bath being full of blood. In March to May 1988, she agrees with James and Rebecca's story about the house with the swimming pool, but after that says nothing significant until months later, when she talks about the fantastic castle, murders on a boat, Mr. Poo Pants, and a local vicar's involvement. On the August 5, 89, after watching a Blue Peter program on the caves under Nottingham, she identifies this as a place where there were monsters. Maggie, the same age as Rebecca and, therefore, the second oldest child. Maggie, despite being in the same household as Lily, says nothing except in reply to direct questioning. Yes, in support of Lily talking about the big house, until 10 months later, when she claims that all the family killed and ate a man on a boat and Mr. Poo Pants burned the body. Otherwise she never talks about witch parties, killing of animals, babies, etc. Anna, aged 11 years at the time of the disclosures. Anna had been in care since 1980, when she was 2.5. The only disclosures she made are in January 1988, having been prompted by her sister's talk. She then talks about witches, a baby doll with a willy being used, being buried in the garden, eating spiders, etc. We know from the records that at the time Anna's favorite library books were witch stories. Anna talks about either her uncle or grandfather being dressed as a devil and being called master. This has been taken as significant, but we do not accept that any child younger than 3 would remember the name used by anybody 8 years ago. Children may recall traumatic events but have little memory of verbal communication, as it has little significance to them at that age. David, although slightly older than Craig when he left home, David says nothing of significance. Claire left home at 20 months, the same age as Kevin, but says nothing. Alice left home at 2.5 years, the age at which Craig remembers so much but says nothing. The need to interpret: we have been told that we must suspend disbelief and that children should be believed by the first statement that needs to be made is that the diaries cannot be taken literally but have to be interpreted. If we do not accept this, we would have to accept the following as literal true statements. The family kill a big sheep with their fingernails and take it to the hospital to get better and bring it back. My mum flies on a broomstick. They throw lots of babies in the bins. I was murdered when I was a baby and shoved in the bin. They kill all of us at the parties. I'm Superman at the parties and I kill the witches. In fact, most of the children disclosing would actually be dead. It is clear to us that anybody looking at these diaries must interpret, and it is insufficient to say that they were telling the truth or we believe the children. Furthermore, we do not consider that suspending disbelief should also mean a suspension of common sense or the use of critical faculties. We have looked at these diaries within their context, without being selective, with an awareness of possible influences upon the foster parents and the children, and with knowledge of basic child psychology. Patterns suggesting contamination. It has been claimed that there were many children talking independently and that this was strong corroborative proof. However, a foster parent told us that she took Lily, Maggie, and David to visit Craig on the day after they came into care, and again 2 days later, and that there was continued contact between the children. A careful reading of the diaries would suggest some sort of communication between them or their 3 foster parents. We would offer the following as examples. Craig tells his foster mother of killing sheep, at which parties they both agreed they had sheep. February 9, 1988, after Mr. W.'s briefing, foster mother asks James about sheep, at which parties. February 25, 1988, foster mother asks Lily about animals, at which parties. Blood in bath. February 26, 1988, Lily tells foster mother about bath full of blood. February 27, 1988, Craig claims bath full of blood to his foster mother. March 17, 1988, James tells his foster mother that sheep's blood is put in the bath. Killing babies. March 21, 1988. Craig tells his foster mother about killing babies. February 10, 1988. Lily tells mother about killing babies. February 11, 1988. Craig tells foster mother about killing babies. February 21, 1988. Rebecca tells foster mother about killing babies. Mr. Brown. May 10, 1988. Craig tells foster mother about Mr. Brown. March 1, 1987. Craig tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants again. April 13, 1987. Lily tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants. May 1, 1987. Craig tells foster mother again about Mr. Poo Pants. May 2, 1987. Maggie tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants. Big house with swimming pool. March 9, 1089. Rebecca tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. March 10, 1989. Lily tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. March 14, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. Selena. March 3, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about Selena. March 21, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about Selena again. April 8, 1989. Lily tells foster mother about Selena. May 6, 1989. Craig repeats it to foster mother. May 12, 1989. Lily repeats it to foster mother. As with the Cleveland case, this case was now beginning to be picked apart. The report continued. The NSPCC unit used symbolic objects in helping children to understand good and bad concepts in their therapy work. According to one of the staff, these were used with Claire and Anna, and the social workers were advised of their use. Craig had 6 therapy sessions between January and August 1987, well prior to the disclosures. A teacher at a local school used the material in one of the satellite cases. The material used includes the following: witches' costumes, monsters placed in a circle in sand, flowing gowns, snakes, spiders, small unclothed baby dolls buried in the sand, toy syringes for extracting blood, a toy medical kit, masks, Mr. Pooh Bear. Conclusion: our interpretation of the diaries based on the foregoing does not support the view that the children have been involved in organized satanic ritual or witchcraft ceremonies. All our research both in this country and abroad has revealed that no actual physical empirical evidence has been found anywhere at any time for satanic abuse. If you still wish to believe that it exists logically, you would have to accept that an organization has the unique ability to keep it secret. even relatively cis, made to drink alcohol, locked in the garages. If this was the case, children of this age trying to make sense of the past would talk of the family being witches, monsters, etc. We know from talking to the adults that one dog was run over in the road and that another dog and its puppies were killed with a knife to save vets' bills because they had a disease. We also know from the adult prisoners that at parties after the pub the children were given homemade alcohol to drink, which would eventually put them to sleep. It is possible that the children were taken elsewhere to be sexually abused for money, as this part of the disclosures stands out on its own, but even here we must be careful, as Craig identifies Brown after seeing a brown lady at nursery, and the children's description of a secret room, 4-poster bed, raised pool, and grandfather clock all feature in a TV program shown in the same year. It is true, however, the baby was thrown out with the satanic bath water, as it was never properly investigated by seeking the judge's permission to interview the children with the police. In summary, we came to the conclusion that the diaries had been used selectively, had been taken too literally, although in fact they must be interpreted. That insufficient consideration has been given to the implications of the fact that most of the disclosures of witch parties, the killing of babies and the slaughtering of sheep, are supposed to have taken place in the living room or garden of a semi-detached council house on a council estate, and that it is predominantly the family that is mentioned as being the perpetrator. That insufficient consideration has been given to the psychology of disturbed children as young as 3 years of age. That too much emphasis has been placed on the number of children disclosing independently, when in reality it is 4 children in 3 foster homes, with 2 of the children being brother and sister living together and 2 of the foster parents being sisters. In our view, there is evidence of the children influencing each other. That insufficient consideration has been given to the influence upon the foster parents, and in particularly their briefing with the American Satanic indicators. That insufficient consideration has been given to other influences upon the children. For example, Anna and Claire were involved in therapeutic sessions at the NSPCC unit. Witches' costumes, toy monsters, masks, unclothed dolls, a toy medical kit, rubber snakes, and plastic spiders were all used. We therefore concluded that although the children may have been terrorized by their sadistic family as well as being sexually abused, we could not support the theory of organized satanic abuse from these diaries. Stage 5: the disclosures of Mary and the other children in the satellite cases. At the start of the inquiry, we were made aware that Mary, a 17-year-old member of the Brockstow family, was intimating that young children had been murdered. After this, Mary was subjected to 3 months of therapeutic work by her social workers, at the end of which the team was presented with a 35-page transcript of disclosures that she had witnessed and been involved in at least 7 child murders and acts of cannibalism at her parents' home during access visits. The transcript was presented to us as the basis for a full police investigation. We were very concerned by this disclosure material as it was clearly full of leading and limited choice questioning. It was apparent to us that the social workers must have been interviewing Mary on the basis that they believed Craig, James and Rebecca when they claimed that she had been present at witch parties. The social workers told Mary that we need to know everything, and all her inconsistent replies are treated as reality. We consider it essential to provide a lengthy extract from this transcript as the work with Mary is important to some of the conclusions in this report. As far as we are aware, the social workers still consider that their work was satisfactory, as the area director wrote to us after our views were made known to him. That the work was well planned and based on sound theory, and that my workers were most unhappy at the way in which Mary was interviewed by the police. The following gives a flavor of the type of questions asked and some of Mary's answers, which are in brackets. Your father's killed a baby more than once. We know that your father delivered a fetus and aborted it. He drank the baby's blood. I didn't know anything about that. You tell us about things that happened when you were there. I ate the stomach. My dad ate the head. What part of the head? What's special about the stomach? Did anybody say why you should eat the baby? Dad brought the baby and the wheelie bin. What then? When you ate the stomach, were you told it was good for you? Did you say any words, prayers, chants? That's one occasion when you had to eat part of a baby. I'd like you to tell us about parties where that happened. Other parties where babies are killed. You had to eat babies more than once. I can't remember. We think you did. Whose baby? Who brought it? A name. Difficult to remember. Who asked you to kill the baby? I didn't kill it. Who told you to? Did she give you a knife? No, I think she did. I think you had to do it. You were scared something might happen to you. Did the social worker stay? You were asked to kill the baby. You had to do it? How was it killed? Last time we met you talked about an 11-year-old boy being killed. I heard it on the news. He was murdered and thrown in the Trent. I don't know who by. Let's have older children you've seen murdered. At a house someone murdered a kid. That's all I remember. How old? Who was there? Who ate it? Did they have to drink the blood? We think you were made to. Did many people get buried in Mum's back garden? That's not right. You said babies were buried somewhere else. Who was buried in the front garden? Mum put the knife in and made you do it? You did it, that's why you're frightened. You quite liked drinking blood and that made you guilty. She made you eat him. Does Mum wear special clothes? Tell us about the adults that have been killed and the church. Did you sexually abuse the little boy before you were made to kill it? Did someone give birth to that baby at the big house? When you got there, was the lady aborting the baby? What did it taste like? What parts did you eat? What other reasons did people in your family kill babies for? At the church drinking blood, who told dad to kill? M. Don't know, I think you did. Does he murder on any special days or times? Craig talked to me about granddad drinking blood. What would Craig say he drinks blood for? Craig says Mary was there, M. To please the devil, that's what Craig was told. Is that what Mary was told? You were told the devil would be pleased. Craig was told it would do special things for him. Things your family did for the devil. Things happened to James, Rebecca, special things. I don't know if special things happened to you, you haven't told us yet. Your family did this because they believe in the devil. Who else had the same belief outside the family? Names. Outside the family, M. Robin. The whole church. Some people in this are important people. You killed at least one baby, more than one, 3, 30. How many? If you didn't feel guilty, you might go on killing. It seems to us that the whole purpose of the therapy is to prove that Mary was involved in Satanism and to find out who further she would implicate. The questioning moves from establishing that she has killed and eaten babies and likes drinking human blood to questions about the adults involved and at church, whether special days were used, whether special clothes were worn, whether prayers, words, or chants were used. It appears to be finally established to the social worker's satisfaction that all this has happened because Mary's family are involved in devil worship. The work appears to have all the elements of an interrogation, leading and limited choice questions, e.g. you killed at least one baby, more than one, 3, 30. How many? Statements make her believe that she had already admitted something. The sudden demand for a name and the church names to catch her off guard are also employed. The questioner appears to have no doubt that the person being questioned is involved, and the task is to make them confess by any means available. It is reminiscent of McFarlane's attitude in the McMartin trial when she calls for unconventional interviewing methods that do whatever it takes to get children to talk. However, to believe Mary, the social workers have to accept that 7 murders and acts of cannibalism had taken place in the front room of a semi-detached house on a council estate to coincide with access visits without anybody noticing, and that a social worker must have been implicated. Faced with this material, which appeared to throw new light on what may have happened in the USA, Canada and Holland, we sought the help of Professors John and Elizabeth Newson of the Child Development Research Unit at Nottingham University and Professor Nicole of the Department of Child Psychiatry at Leicester University. Professor Newson advised us that Mary should be interviewed by the police in the presence of her social worker on video, and he further advised that the first session should encourage Mary to say anything that she wanted to without any questioning, and that this videotape should be compared with the original transcript before a second interview was conducted, at which probing questions could be asked. This advice was followed completely. During the course of the second interview, Mary explained that the only knowledge that she had was obtained from the social workers who had told her Craig's story. She said that she had been pressurized and that the social workers would not take no for an answer. She thought that her nephew Craig would get into trouble if she did not back him up. Everything that she had disclosed to the social workers was totally untrue, and she had only been to one birthday party at her parents' house since she came into care. We have since been concerned to learn that the social workers were most unhappy at the way in which Mary was interviewed by the police, with the implication that they still believe that she was originally telling the truth. In our view, it was an excellent police interview which we would recommend anybody to watch. After reading the transcript and studying all the videos with regard to Mary, Professors John and Elizabeth Newson have since written to us with the following comments from John Newson. I suggest that this case should be carefully documented and presented by the team because it is perhaps an important example of how the truth might be subverted and the whole factual situation confused if the guidelines and principles set out above are ignored. Special facts leading to his conclusion seem to be overall confounding of investigative and therapeutic aims by social workers, confusion over what does and what does not constitute evidence, social workers, asking leading questions, social workers, attributing actual behavior both to Mary and to her mother before this behavior has been in any way established by evidence other than Mary's inconsistent testimony. This behavior is stated as a clear fact. One may cite numerous occasions where the social workers did assert as bald fact their belief that Mary had witnessed and participated in child murder and in the eating of human flesh. There are many inconsistencies in the stories told by Mary at different points in these transcripts. The social work interviewers also imply to Mary that the facts were not in dispute but that it was her memory of them that was faulty. This is a procedure which in other contexts might well be described as brainwashing. In fact, Mary frequently describes herself as confused. Between them, the interview records suggest to me that Mary has been led into confabulating a story which she herself now half believes on the basis of statements made to her by social workers during disclosure interviews. If this assessment is correct, the disclosure procedure she has been put through may well have persuaded this disturbed and confused young woman that she herself is a child murderer, has drunk human blood and has eaten human flesh in collusion with her mother. And she has been left with the conviction that these misdeeds were partly at the instigation of a personified devil who she may believe might well try to induce her to perform similar bestial acts in the future. There may indeed be organized groups of individuals practicing ritual abuse in this community, but none of the material I have seen or heard would count as convincing evidence as it stands. In my view, also the accounts of adults, Mandy and Vivian, being offered are simply not consistent with the detailed accounts they could have given had they actually been present at genuine witchcraft ceremonies. I am particularly concerned that in the course of their disclosure interviews the social workers involved appear to have offered the children a whole vocabulary for describing their experiences, which serves to transform their accounts into apparently plausible description of witchcraft practices. Professors John and Elizabeth Newson would wish to emphasize that the comments in their report were based upon the evidence submitted to them, i.e. upon the one or two very specific interviews with particular clients, and that there may be other evidence which deserved to be taken into account to which they did not have access. They were not commenting on the competence of social workers generally. Professor Nicole, after reading the transcript and viewing Mary's 4 videotapes, comments as follows. I believe that for proper management it is essential that the facts of the abuse should be established as far as possible. Although this may be difficult, normal rules of evidence must be observed. I note that the videotape interviews that I have been asked to view follow the weekend sessions in which ritualistic abuse was discussed. It is not clear whether these weekend sessions were for the purposes of disclosure, therapy, or both. The transcript process record reveals that simple principles of neutral questioning have not been followed. This is a grossly leading line of questioning and is followed throughout the interviews. I would want to place these elaborate allegations in the context of her general adjustment. Is there other evidence of fantasizing, not uncommon, or attention-needing behavior? Most important, is there collateral evidence for these far-reaching allegations? What we can say is that the interviewing technique used in the original disclosure involved the extensive use of leading questions and was experienced by Mary as pressurizing according to comments made in the third tape. Unless there has been a lot of assessment work that I am unaware of, I believe that attention in this case has been inappropriately focused on obtaining a disclosure of Satanism practices. I can see no evidence from these interviews that such practices took place. Mary was not the only new case referred to the team during the 5 months of its existence. In total, a further 11 children were brought to our attention who appeared to be describing ritualistic/satanic abuse. Professor Newson's advice was followed and all but 2 were interviewed and videoed by police at Epperstone. Amy, aged 14. Alleged satanic ritualistic abuse involving named people and 13 children. She claimed that she had been taken to a black house where a ceremony took place involving 100 people. She withdrew all her allegations, stating that she wished to remain in care and had made up all the stories. Lily, aged 9. Alleged babies being cooked in a microwave oven, witchcraft parties, and satanic parties held at Wallaton Hall. The disclosures were obtained by her foster mother, who tape recorded the conversation. Lily started the police interviews by repeating her allegations, but when questioned regarding facts could give no coherent answers. Eventually she fully retracted her allegations and went on to explain that she wanted to please her foster mother during the interviews conducted by her. The foster mother had questioned her between recordings. Neil, aged 8. Also in care and placed with one of the Brockstow children's former foster parents, alleged that he had been to scary parties at a lady's house. That the woman had killed a baby and placed it in a microwave. He went on to speak of frightening parties in graveyards at which adults wore vampire suits and that the children were locked in caves. At his police interview he did not retract his story but went on to say that babies were cooked for 6 hours and came out black, previously raw. He was not aware that the baby would have exploded. He went on to say that spiders talked. He could not identify any of the places he had mentioned when taken to see them. Coincidentally, he made this disclosure within a week of social work staff attending the reading conference on child abuse and learning there from Jerry Simandl, who produced the second set of Satanic. Indicators used by social services, that children in the USA had reported babies being cooked in microwave ovens. Rebecca, aged 7. In care, sharing a foster home with Neil, alleged being at parties held in cemeteries and of babies being killed or placed in microwaves. At the police interview his allegations became more bizarre. He claimed that 2 of his best friends had been murdered and that 5 babies had been microwaved and that he was nearly forced to eat part of the body. He then stated that they microwaved the adults to see how they like it and put them in the skip. He went on to talk of pirates digging for gold at Wallaton Park and that he had been in the tunnels with Neil and there was a monster every mile. He talked of cavemen living underwater. Clara, aged 6. In care and with one of the Brockstow children's former foster parents, Craig. Alleged a witch party in a wood. She could not expand on this, but the site where the witches' parties took place does not exist. We do not know when the social workers acquired their current theories of satanic abuse or when they started using their techniques of disclosure therapy. All we have been able to learn from Craig's records is that he was involved in 8 play therapy sessions at his area office between March and August 1987 when he would have been 3.5. But we do not know the content of these. We asked for the audio and videotapes used in these sessions, for information from the social workers upon the therapeutic approach adopted, the models for disclosure work and information on the play therapy approach adopted by them. The area director, however, wrote to us. As you will recall, when the joint investigation team was set up, there was a great deal of sensitivity regarding their role, and I was assured by yourself and the director that the workers were not being investigated, rather that the evidence information was being reviewed. If that is the case, then I cannot see why information regarding the model style of the workers needs to be looked at, and as such I have instructed the senior social worker not to hand over that information. Likewise, the NSPCC unit refused to let us have the videotapes and records of the work done there with Anna and Claire. In view of this, although we have never doubted that the children were sexually abused, we cannot come to any informed conclusion as to whether any earlier therapy work with the Brockstow children has influenced their subsequent disclosures, and we have not had the opportunity to check with the social workers our judgments on their work with the children or Jane. Shortly before the end of the inquiry, we considered that we were grappling with some uncomfortable information. It was apparent from Mary's disclosures that they were based upon social work interviews with Craig, which presumably must have taken place before he became a ward of court. Craig had been received into care in December 1986 while his cousins had been removed on place of safety orders in October 1987. We understood that the decision to remove them was based in part at least upon disclosures made by Craig. Jane's second statement, "NB, she is an adult, to the police in August 1988 if it is true appeared to grow in significance when seen in the light of the work done with Mary after March 1989. It seemed to us to suggest a similar approach by the same team of social workers at a much earlier date. The following are extracts from Jane S. statement. When the case was in full swing, my social worker started interviewing me and asking me questions about parties involving witches. The first time I told her that the only parties of any kind I had been to were at the family home, I told her I didn't know anything about any other houses. She started asking me over and over again whether I'd been to any other big houses where witch parties had taken place. I kept saying I hadn't, but in the end I just got fed up with being asked, so I just said yes. She asked me to describe the houses. I told her I couldn't, so she said she'd take me round to see them in the car. She pointed to the house and asked me if that was the house. I said yes. She asked me what had happened while I was there. I told her there were video cameras there and children being abused. I made it all up. I had never been to that house before in my life. I made up a description of the inside of the house. She took me to another house near Walton Park. She asked me whether this was another house I'd been to. I just said yes. I agreed with whatever she said. I have been interviewed about 20 times by my social worker about these houses, but all I do is just keep saying yes. I have seen Mandy many times over the past few months, and she's told me she's been telling the social services about witch parties. I know she's telling lies. Mandy S. told me that if I tell the social services about witch parties at big houses, I might have a chance of getting my daughter back. My social workers told me if I tell the truth I could get my daughter back. Everything I have told the social worker is lies. I've told her the truth more than once, but she wouldn't believe me, so I just said anything. The only things I know about witchcraft and magic are the things I've seen on the telly. I was in court when my statements were read out in the care proceedings. Some of this was the things I had told the social worker. I was frightened to say that it wasn't true. Research into other cases in the UK. At this stage of the inquiry, we also made inquiries elsewhere in the country. Most of the police forces and the NSPCC had no information, but we obtained an interesting response from Congleton and Humberside. We have met with the chief inspector from Humberside, who has told us that after a national evangelical proponent of satanic abuse spent many hours with two 11-year-old boys at her home, they eventually alleged satanic abuse. A well-respected schoolmaster was arrested, but intensive police investigations found that none of these allegations against the schoolmaster were based on reality. As a consequence of the discrediting of the witnesses due to the improper intervention of this person, the prosecution had to drop serious charges of rape and buggery against 2 men. The Attorney General became involved. The police were convinced that they had a good case against these men, but were left with only the one defendant who pleaded guilty. In the information presented to us at the start of the inquiry, we were informed that in Congleton 2 separate groups of children who had not had contact with each other talked about babies being killed. They had also talked about people dressed as clowns, people dressed up as animals, lions, and tigers, and animals being sacrificed. We contacted the investigating police, who informed us that the case revolved around 3 families who were all neighbors. The children concerned belonged to 2 of the families. The evidence which could be substantiated revolved around sexual abuse only. Whilst the children aged 5, 6, 10, and 12 years were in care, they made allegations of attending parties and the murder of a baby named Daniel, whose body was buried in a back garden. The back garden was excavated and thermal image intensifiers were used. No evidence of a body was found. The allegation was then altered and the body was said to be buried on waste ground. This was also checked and no body was found. The children had made the disclosures during therapeutic work and were believed by the social workers. We were also told that one of the national figures arousing public consciousness of ritual child abuse had visited Congleton, but we do not know whether this was before or after the children's disclosures. Like the Cleveland abuse claims, the claims of satanic ritual abuse in Nottingham were also dismissed as fantasy. Social workers were blamed in both cases for the accusations of Satanism and rituals.